Hello, and welcome back to Processing the Process, where we capture and discuss the technical, psychological, and contextual dynamics that shape the process of creating a work of art. Week by week, moment by moment, we are following Jonathan Riddell, choreographer and artistic director of Riddell Dance Theater, as he creates his latest works for RDT's Second Story Dance Project and ventures into new creative territory. Today, we will focus on Second Story's 78th rehearsal, which took place on June 27th of 2018, and introduce you to some of Jonathan's new creative pursuits. Now, it's been about 3 weeks or so since our last videocast, so to serve as a reminder for our viewers, Mandy had informed us that she needed to take June off because of scheduling conflicts. Lorena felt it would be helpful for her to have July off, and then John, you had speculated that you could miss very possibly 2 to 3 Wednesday rehearsals in August. So we concluded it would probably be best to take a hiatus for the summer, and we agreed to resume rehearsals September 12th. It's possible that on any given Wednesday, 2 out of the 3 dancers may wind up getting together and dancing, but at the very least, we will all be together back in September. And I imagine, John, we're going to have to really hit the ground running at that point, because happily we've got at least 2 big projects coming up in the fall. The first, if we are selected, of course, would be the Steffi Nossen Choreographers Showcase that will take place at the Emlyn Theater in November. And we submitted an application to perform Jonathan's work, Brittle Branches. And we already had a discussion amongst the team members about preparation for this show in a way that's pretty similar, from what I understand, John, to the way you would normally prepare for a professional performance, which would be reviewing the material and staying in shape in the weeks in between rehearsals to make sure that you are ready. And that will be helpful as we move into December, when we have our when we will be participating in the Mamaroneck Arts Council's Art Life Series program. Now, this which should be great, and the good news for us is that it's going to be quite similar, I think, to our March showing, in which we performed Jonathan's Brittle Branches, Lorena's Voices, Mandy's still, I think, as yet untitled solo for Lorena, and big question mark, John, if you're going to do Embers and Ash. Maybe, maybe not.
We'll see.
But in any event, throughout that program, we will be talking about the technical, psychological, logistical elements that drove the visions for each of these choreographers and have shaped the development of these works over time. So we've got a lot to look forward to, but for now, we are on hiatus. And in our last videocast, we did some analysis of what this is all about, what the impetus for the hiatus was. We talked about potential advantages of doing this, possible downsides that could occur. We really tried to make meaning of this quite significant development for Second Story, and we promised to keep you posted on what this process has felt like. And with that, I'm going to ask John if you could share with us, please, what this experience has been like for you for the past month.
Gosh, that's a lot. I think for the most part it's been positive. It's been quite positive. I have a few other projects that I have been able to now focus on, and I'm luckily not too worried about Second Story. I feel like what we have possibly going on in the fall is very exciting. It's also very doable as long as we kind of stick to the schedule we've proposed for ourselves. And so, you know, I'm able to like put any concerns about that off for now, and enjoy some free time. Now, the responsibility I then have is to make sure I'm still doing things to stay in shape with my body, with my physical self, taking care of it. It would be very easy to just let all of that go, but I've certainly discovered over the years that I am not a happy person when I let all of that go. So I've been trying to give myself class every now and then when I can find a moment, either down in my basement or I think I have been able to slip away to a studio once or twice. I'm getting on the old treadmill that has been sitting off camera over there for a while now, untouched, and thank goodness it's there. It still serves a purpose. So staying diligent and not forgetting about those things. But in terms of art, I have some non-dance projects that I'm touching back on, which has been a thrill. A long time ago, back when, just before my son was born, I started writing some children's stories, and they're all connected, and that's been a very long process. And I put them down maybe a year ago, but I'm excited to pick those back up again. I haven't actually yet, but I'm hoping this summer I can at least touch base with them and sort of water those seeds a little bit to keep them fresh. What I have been focusing on is music. Music's always been a huge part of my life, and while I wasn't specifically creating music or performing music while I was invested in my dance career, dance and music are so closely connected that music was still always in my brain and in my heart, and a huge part of my art. So now I'm able to focus on some composing. I sort of have two projects that I'm working on. One is instrumental. I'm creating a series of music pieces that would sort of flow and work together very much like a classical piece of music would. There are movements, there are with different tempos. There's an andante, there's a scherzo, blah blah blah, and there's maybe, I can't remember if there's 5 or 6 sections right now, but they all sort of again work together in a suite. And the other is some songs. Songwriting was actually my first love back when I was an adolescent, and that I hadn't gotten, and that I let go of back in high school. So it's really been that was a long hiatus, but I've sort of delved back into it in earnest, and with the all the new technology that's around these days that I didn't have back in high school is around now, and I'm sort of just allowing myself to be a kid again and delve into that. And I don't need to have a huge band. I can kind of use these music programs that are available and put some ideas together, and even record like some demo vocals and create like a suite of songs, a collection of songs, a little mini album of sorts. So that's been my passion project these days. The other two projects that are on the horizon are dance related. One, as you audience may know, I do teach at SUNY Purchase, and they're talking about doing a Limon piece, and would like me to reconstruct it because it's a piece that I danced for many years in the Limon company. And right now the dates are tentative. My full participation is tentative as to whether I might do all of it or just stage part of it or just coach it and have someone else stage it. So all that's still to be decided. We're not exactly sure how that's going to plan out, but it is something that I have to think about and have meetings about and budget time for.
Exactly.
And the other dance project is a collaboration with the Albany Berkshire Ballet. Mm-hmm. They are a company that I set a piece on, 2 pieces on, in the spring, and that went over very well. One of those pieces was one movement of a larger work, and in presenting that work, I talked to the directors and the audience. There was a talk back, and presenting the work. They wanted me to speak about it. So I described the whole piece to them, and they really got excited about it. And so we're now in discussion about staging the entire work up there, which is great. I hope it happens.
And what is the name of the work?
This is Verdant Fire.
Verdant Fire.
Yes. It's a piece I've made in sections at various institutions. One was on my own company, one was on the conservatory at Pace University, one was on the conservatory at Purchase, and there's one more section which I will indeed be setting on ABB, Albany Berkshire Ballet, in a couple weeks. We're going to start that. So that is a duet, which we'll talk more about in a few minutes.
Right.
But so those rehearsals will start. And right now, they have one section already. I'll be creating this duet, and we're trying to figure out how we can make the other 2 sections happen for them, right, so that they'll have the whole piece. And we'll see. We'll keep you posted.
Absolutely. I mean, very, very exciting and of quite a broad range of endeavors. Mm-hmm. I thought maybe we'd take this opportunity, Jon, to just begin to dive a little bit into the writing and composing pursuits.
Sure.
I mean, you gave us a beautiful overview of ABB and Purchase collaborations, and as Jon said, we'll keep you informed as work on these projects develop. But as I joke about with Jonathan, we could probably speak about the writing and musical composition for hours on end. In total, over months of videocasts, we probably will. Mm-hmm. But for now, we'll just have a bit of an introduction, and I thought I'd lead into it with a couple of questions that were certainly on my mind and perhaps on yours as well. With regard to writing and composing, what do you find so compelling about each of those 2 endeavors?
Well, I would say with writing, storytelling has always been very important to me, very much a part of my psyche and my art. Through dance, I've always explored storytelling. And I've always been involved in theater and storytelling in that way. Right. So with writing, in a way, I get to do my storytelling unadulterated. I don't have to worry about, could a performer carry that off? Can this be conveyed through this other medium? It's words on paper. So whatever I sort of think up, I can write down and describe and explain in words, which is sort of almost, it's the most immediate, perhaps other than speech, than talking with people and storytelling that way. I also love writing because I can then craft my words. I can take my time. I'm not just speaking and telling the story, which again has its own benefits. It has that immediacy. But I do love words and crafting my words, as I said, and yeah. Anyway, so that's a huge delight for me. Now it's also scary because then there's with all of that freedom, you then have to figure out all of the parameters that you then want to put on the work and figure out what is true for this work and what stylistic choices do I want to make, what structural choices do I want to make, and I'm not, I've been doing that in dance for many years now. In writing, that's a new medium for me. So so it's been there's been a lot of trial and error. I have the stories that I've worked on, at least the first ones, I have rewritten so many times. Sherri, you know this. I've shared a lot of these rewrites with you. Yes. I've written different versions of the stories, some targeted at like little babies, some targeted at younger kids, some targeted at teens, and trying to figure out what's the right fit for the story, what's the right fit for my attention span, their attention span. It's been nuts, but I feel like I've sort of where I'm at now, I've hit kind of a sweet spot, and I don't know if it's the best spot from the marketing standpoint or whatnot, in terms of these ever being published, but it's sort of a pre-adolescent age where I can be fanciful and yet still have some biting humor in there and talk about some edgier topics of life, and have fun and let the kid in me again kind of take over for a little bit.
Exactly. And with your music?
Music's very similar in terms of I feel like there's even more than that I can express and experiment with than dance, because I'm doing it well, anytime I'm creating on my own and I don't need to collaborate with other people, obviously then you're freer to try wacky things and do wacky things. Of course you could go completely crazy and then people look at you like, wow, you really went off the deep end with that. So that's where collaboration and feedback and working with someone is great. But, again, in terms of the creative freedom, it's wonderful to work in music. And again, similar to working with people, I'm not, or at least in this situation where I am right now, dance can be really tricky when you're trying to wrangle people's schedules and balance their abilities with your abilities. And again, I love it. It's what I'm used to and what I do, but it's very different. And I feel like there's a lot I can say with dance, but then there's a lot of things that I've tried to say with dance and haven't been successful, or have deemed, no, I won't be able to do that. And now is an opportunity for me to try it in a different medium. Right. Topics, ideas, emotions that I'm like, but I can express that in my music. So,
well, as you can see, we have tons to follow up on in the months ahead. Very, very exciting. Jon, what competencies and experiences as a choreographer do you bring with you to your writing and your musical composition?
That's something I've actually thought a lot about. Dance has helped me to identify myself in these other mediums. For example, in my writing, I realize that as I'm writing, I'm still thinking very theatrically about the work, and I'm embracing that. I'm enjoying that. So sometimes I feel like I'm writing a script for a play. It obviously doesn't read like a script, but in terms of okay, now I'll think, okay, how do I get these characters out of this scene? Instead of off stage, I just need to get them out of this location, and then we can transition to the next scene, so to speak. I don't know if other writers think that way, but that's how I think, because that's my background. I think about dialogue in a way that's, again, sort of inspired by theater. And I hope, and I think it's interesting to write that way. So that's what I'm going with. I also try and think about action in theatrical ways, and how I describe the action of what's going on in the story. And really with that in mind, I compared my writing to a script, and I think that's true. I think I'm very focused on what the characters do and what they say. And that sounds very basic, but that's really what I'm just trying to put on paper. I'm right now, at least, not so interested in putting a lot of detail into what how the characters are feeling. I don't necessarily want to. I mean, I have to know how they're feeling,
yes,
but I don't need to declare it for the audience, because what the characters do and what they say indicates how they're feeling. That's my stylistic choice. Other writers are very successful at describing what these emotions must be like, and they say it so beautifully and eloquently. But again, at least right now, that's something I'm not interested in doing. I want the reader to fill in those blanks. Did I answer the question?
You did it. That's one half. I give him a lot to do. And how do those talents and experiences help you with your music composition?
Well, again, certainly dance and music are 90% of the time directly linked. Again, most of the time, if you're dancing, you are dancing to music. So understanding musical structure, dynamics, accents, phrasing, the artistry of music is very important to a dancer. So already my background, the way I think, is very musical. But then certainly in terms of composition, all of the work I've done learning about choreography, studying choreography, performing choreography, watching it, helps me understand how to structure a piece, whatever genre it's in. And so I bring that to my music. I think in terms of theater, I think in terms of poetic dance pieces and how they might translate into music. I think of instruments as dancers and them making entrances and exits, and perhaps they just whisk across the stage for a moment, or perhaps they come circling in and perform for a minute or two in the space before leaving. And what are they performing? Is it delicate? Is it impacting? Is it just a suggestion of an idea, or is it the full idea coming forward? I think that all relates to music too.
Absolutely. So in fact, you've already beautifully begun to address what my third question is today, which has to do with the similarities between choreography, writing, and musical composition with regard to the way in which the works in each genre are constructed. So I imagined, for example, knowing how you tend to approach choreography, might it be similar in terms of first creating a skeletal framework, identifying the contextual elements, and then over time fleshing out the details? But of course, you would know best how that works. But it sounds like, from what you described already, that the way in which you conceptualize it and approach it is very similar, genre to genre.
Yes, well, yeah, it's interesting. Again, in my training and in my studies, I've studied with a few choreography teachers, but the one who I studied most with, Kazuko Hirabayashi, her background studying with Louis Horst, who was a musician who worked with dancers, is very much analyzing the structures of dance in parallel with musical structures. So so I am always thinking about the structure of a dance in similarly to how music is structured. And sort of how I've already said, I then think about all the other mediums in that same way. So if perhaps maybe I reach a stumbling block in one piece, perhaps in my writing, and then to solve that, I'll then think about, I'll find a musical solution or a theatrical solution or a dance solution, or, I'll think about a different art form or a painting, how I look at painting now. I look at painting very much in musical structures and dance structures to understand them, and vice versa. So I would go so far as to say, at least in my mind, I feel like all art has a structure. Perhaps all of life has a structure, I don't know, but art has these structures, I should say, and tools that you can use to create them, and they have their parallels in every genre. Now, in terms of what you said, the kind of, you said it very well. There are sort of, when I'm creating something, I do want to flesh out a skeleton, or build a skeleton. You do have to consider your context, how much time you have, what your clay is, what your tools are, who are your dancers, or who are your actors, or what instruments do you have, and then all the nuanced details, including the emotional performance. I don't think there's actually an order to those things that that you follow 100%. One might think, oh, well, first you have to build the skeleton, then you put all the details and the flesh on it. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you just get the foot made, and you're like, okay, I've made a foot, but I don't know if this is going to be a human or an elephant or some sort of mythical creature. Let me put some flesh on it and see how I feel about it. Oh, look, it has elephant skin, so maybe it is an elephant. But is it a real elephant? Let me know. Or is it some fanciful elephant? And so sometimes you have to jump to the other category, so to speak, figure out some of that, and then move on. Then you can look at, again, your context and say, well, I don't have time to build a fanciful elephant. I'm going to build a real one, and so let me go back and fix the skeleton to make it. So those things, they all have to talk to each other. I feel like we've talked about this before. I feel like all of those categories need to get fulfilled. All of the sort of problems that you might face or questions you might come up with, they do need an answer, but there's not a specific order they need to be answered in. As long as they sort of all get addressed by the time you're done, so to speak.
And might you really be describing our favorite word, my favorite word, pardon me, process?
Yes.
where all of these elements are interacting with one another in pretty complex ways, moment to moment to moment over time, and that over time all of this starts to come together. But there's really, you can have inclinations in the beginning, but there's really no way to know what is going to emerge, because there's way too much complexity in the interaction of all these elements over time, and you just, I think, have to go for that ride and see where it takes you. And again, there's so much follow-up I'd like to do, and I'm reining myself in for our future videocast. But as a last question for today regarding this, is there anything that writing and musical composition provide for you personally that choreography does not?
That's a great question. Well, I mentioned this a little bit. I feel like there are some stories, some ideas that are better suited to one medium or another. Again, at least for me, another artist might come along and say, "Are you kidding? I can totally say that in a dance or in a song." But for me, like if I want to tell a literal story in dance, like a story ballet where you see the mom, the dad, the child, and they interact in a particular way, and something happens, some bad guy shows up or something, and all of that wants to be clear. In dance, because you don't have words, you typically are dealing with archetypes. So it's a mother figure, it's a father figure, it's a child figure. Is it a mother and a father and a stepfather? Maybe. It doesn't matter. It's just the father figure, If it's important that he be a stepfather, then you have to figure out a way to tell that to the audience, probably with some backstory scene where you see the original father leave and then this new guy step in. But in writing, you can just say stepfather and that's it. You're done. So that's why I say there are certain stories that are better suited for certain mediums. I think Balanchine even said there are no stepmothers in dance, something like that. I'm paraphrasing it badly, and it's because of exactly what I said. It's like you can't get so specific unless you're really gonna spend a scene explaining that one little detail. So if I want to tell a story that is full of those details and those subtleties in terms of specifics, then writing is so much easier. And similarly, music is, because music you're dealing with words often. So you can say the word stepfather in a song and people will get it. But I think that's, so there's that. And there are other examples of that, why one medium is more suited than others. In terms of logistics and context, again, similar to what I said earlier, if I want to create a dance on someone, now we need to schedule that time. If I want to create dance on a company, all of that company time needs to be scheduled. All that rehearsal time needs to get scheduled. Training time to get the dancers ready in the way I want them to be ready for my dances takes time. And then cleaning up the process, all of that. It's wonderful, it's valuable, it's fantastic when you have that, and I'm always anxious to have that. But when I don't have that, I need to be realistic. And I've discovered that I used to sort of allow myself to get really tense and angry and push, no, but I need that time, and so let me wrangle these people's schedules and beat them up into getting into rehearsal, and struggling with it, thinking that was the only outlet for me. But what I've come to realize is I need a flow and I need quality. So if I only can get 2 dancers or 1 dancer, great, I'm going to make a fabulous duet or a fabulous solo. If I can get no dancers, maybe I'll make something on myself. Great. Or maybe I don't want to dance. Maybe dancing isn't the medium for me right now. Let me write, let me compose, let me paint. Not that I'm painting, but maybe I'll paint one day. I want to experience quality and depth in my work, and it doesn't matter to me, at least right now, what the medium is or what it looks like.
It sounds like you can utilize the different mediums for all kinds of different purposes depending upon where you are internally, what's going on for you contextually, and that this can be a very, very fluid type of process. You can move from one to the next. You may be working on 2, maybe 3 simultaneously. So many similarities, so many advantages here, challenges there, and perhaps having all of these in your toolbox, as you're fond of saying, gives you I imagine more opportunities and the freedom to explore what is in here and investigate it in all kinds of different ways, even when life presents obstacles that make it tough to do, say, here, or tough to do it in this way, and that you now have seems to me have many more options for your artistic development, particularly given your context. So we very much look forward to fleshing this out as we move forward. But for the moment, this really leads us to our most recent rehearsal today, where we knew coming into it
if
that
you can call it a rehearsal.
if you can call it, yeah, we're using the terms somewhat
Work
loosely,
session.
work session. But the plan was to head over to Purchase because Steffi Nossen, for the most part, where we normally rehearse, does not have studio space available for us for most of the summer. So we planned to go to Purchase College to snag studio space, and Jonathan had hoped to really do significant work on his Verdant Fire duet, move a bit, as you say, and perhaps even get a little bit of musical composition in. Well, that was the plan. And we arrived at Purchase to discover that, unfortunately, there were no studios available. So what did we do? We made our own out of 2 benches, a little lawn, and a copse of trees. And
It was
John,
lovely.
it was really quite lovely, and John was able to move, so he did get that part of it in, but most of all, really focus on the development of the Verdant Fire duet, which essentially, I could say we could divide into 2 sections, if you will. The first being the time that John needed to put in to listen to the music in order to trace the musical structure. He wanted to make note of the places where there were big musical changes, where, as you're fond of saying, John, there were strong musical gestures. He wanted to identify the musical themes and figure out where they repeat. So in essence, I thought of it as Jonathan mapping out the entire piece of music so that he then could move into section 2, in which he was writing down the ideas he had for the dance, which he essentially called plot points, and ensuring that these plot points would be coordinated with the map of the musical landscape, so to speak, that he had just developed. Now, he also had a couple more constraints to think about. Earlier, you said, Jon, that Verdant Fire is a piece that has 4 different sections. Jonathan has already choreographed section 1 and section 3. This particular duet is section 2. So, as we have talked about with your Sweet Suite of Grief pieces that you're also working on, here we have a situation where when Jonathan's thinking about what he's going to do in the beginning of section 2, the duet, he knows it needs to logically flow from what he's already created at the end of section 1. And then when you're thinking about the end of section 2, we know it needs to logically lead into what Jonathan's already created for the beginning of section 3. So it's like a little puzzle piece here. And also, of course, the choices that you make need to fit thematically within the overall narrative arc of the entire Verdant Fire piece. So there was quite a lot to consider.
A lot to think about.
I'm kind of tired even describing it in summary. So now I'm going to give Jon the hard part, which is, can you tell us about the ideas that you came up with for the duet, given this structure that you created? How did that come to be?
Yes. Well,
and here's a cheat sheet.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness
to help, because it's a lot.
Sheet.
It's a lot.
Yeah. So, well, everything Sherri just described is true. I do think of the music as a map, and there are and trying to get what I would call the plot of my dance to fit well with that musical map. I think you described that pretty well. That's sort of one huge consideration. And how it fits in to the map of the entire piece, right. Movement 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this central figure I have in the dance, danced by an old compatriot of mine, Lisa McBride. She Hi everyone, we're back. We had a little technical blip there, but here we go. So I was describing this piece, Verdant Fire, and how section 2 fits in. So the central figure of the dance goes on a bit of a journey. We could talk for hours about it, but essentially she is shedding her skin in the first section. There's a second section. Don't know yet what happens. Third section, skin is gone, she's fresh, she's a baby deer, and she's being put through tests with the other people around her, getting her steeled and ready for life. And the final section is a big celebration. She's fully herself, she's found her niche among her companions, and they all celebrate life together, basically. So what happens in that mysterious second section? We don't know. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Exactly. So the other thing to note, and the other thing we have to figure out, is there's a piece of fabric that represents that skin that she sheds, and in the first section, it's wrapped around her. It starts to come off. It gets wrapped around her again, blah, blah, blah. Eventually, she's scared to take it off, but then she's able to. And at the very end of the section, she's free of it. It's wadded up in her hands, and she drops it on the ground in front of one of the other dancers. So that's where we leave off. and I now need to make sense of that metaphor in the next section. And I know that metaphorically that fabric will get utilized, but then it needs to ultimately not be with her. It needs to be gone by the end of the second section to make sense with what happens in the third. So that's part of what I'm trying to figure out. And gosh, what else?
Well, you had a couple of ideas or questions for yourself that you wanted to be able to answer, whether it was today or down the line.
Right. So I think what I arrived at is she is dancing a duet with this other dancer, the one that she dropped the fabric in front of. And this is really a time for her to question whether she's going to, how she's going to proceed into this new life that she has just been born or reborn into. He is presenting her with the fabric again, saying, here, don't you want this? You just dropped it, but isn't it valuable to you? It's your old life, and it was fabulous, and it still looks good on you, kind of a thing. You know, these are all things he might be saying to her. At the same time, there is some romantic interest. I also think of this as her being, again, born or reborn into a new sensuality, a new, not necessarily sexual, but just understanding life and tasting life. But with him, there's at least a romantic possibility. And again, how far does that romantic possibility develop? How deep does that go? That's part of what I'm trying to figure out.
Right.
So there is going to be a bit of him seducing her, and is it his own personal needs that he's wanting, or is he genuinely interested in her and perhaps falling in love with her, or is he seducing her into her old life? Is it just about the seduction of what you had, what you're used to, this fabric? Is that the seduction? So yeah, again, all questions that I have, but I think what I arrived at is I want him to present the fabric. I want him to present a seduction, and I want her to consider it. At first, she says, "No, I'm going to try out this new way of being," but then I want her to think, "Oh, he's right. There is. Maybe I don't have to throw it all away, or maybe I shouldn't try this new way. Maybe this old way still really works for me." And ultimately, by the end, though, she needs to figure out, no, indeed, I'm going to stay true to this new idea. I'm going to stay committed, with conviction,
yes.
and go forward into the third movement and the true trials. Within that, again, I figured out a lot of details that I at least want to attempt to realize. I could maybe post them online or something. We could go through all of it.
Well, this is interesting, John, because I'm wondering. I just had this image come into my mind, as images are wont to do with me, of John in two pieces, and one John speaking to the other John and posing lots of questions, possibilities, asking yourself, what do you want? What might be happening? What are the different ways it could play out? Could it be this? Could it be that? And I imagine almost like a branching tree. Well, if maybe this, then you could go this way. But if it's that, and that going through the exercise of identifying possibilities and their implications, and almost having this internal dialogue, considering it, and then coming out of the process with an inclination at least
Yes.
as to which way you want to go. And as you've described to us before, then testing out that idea. Does this actually work? Because you're not writing alone and you're not composing alone. So does this actually work when I'm working with these dancers?
Yeah.
How does this how do my ideas translate given these contextual variables, so to speak? So
and this is something we had mentioned earlier, and sort of in the idea of having these sort of categories of concerns, and all of these questions do need to get answered, but in what order, and there's no perfect way. I think of it like a Venn diagram, in that, there's what story do I want to tell might be one circle, what's possible to do in the medium and with these dancers might be another circle. The map, the music, all of those things. There's possibilities, there's ideas, there's challenges within each circle, and then each circle overlaps with the other. And so you can then look at, oh, well, I can tell this story with these dancers, oh, but it's the wrong music, okay. Or, blah, blah, blah. And then what you find in that middle, that's your sweet spot.
Right.
And what I'm very much trying to do is figure out what's in that sweet spot, what are the possibilities of that sweet middle spot, and go with that. Now, I'm going to, if I had tons of studio time, I might leave a lot more up to figuring it out in the studio, where I have the dancers and can play more and experiment more. If I'm really crunched for time, I want to get a lot of that sort of experimentation to the best of my ability done in my head, so that I can come in with just a much more focused plan, which is what I'm trying to do in this case.
Exactly.
Especially with, like I said, the story arc that I'm trying to convey in the bigger work. I don't want to go off on some tangent and then be left with a piece that doesn't fit in well with the rest of the dance.
Right.
So, Venn diagram, sweet spot, that's really what I'm going for. I think I arrived at a very good plan that ticks all the boxes and will be interesting, will be beautiful, will be musical, and now I have to bring it into the studio with the dancers and make sure it works 100%.
Exactly. And really, as soon as Jon finished this work, he let me know that he felt very, very good about what had just transpired.
Yeah, I definitely was like, I figured it out.
It's like, I think I nailed it. Yeah. You really had your structure. And the other piece that you had communicated to me is wanting to be sure that the metaphor of the fabric was clear throughout. And you felt that you had done that. So it was really interesting for me to observe you during this process, because of course much of this is taking place in his head. I do not have X-ray vision, sorry, so I really can't tell you.
We should work on that.
I know, I'm developing that skill.
Talk
I hope.
to Google.
Exactly, but it was clear, putting all the pieces together and discussing it subsequently with Jonathan, that a tremendous amount of work had taken place. As Jon said, given the contextual elements here in this collaboration with ABB and what looks like it's going to be a limited amount of rehearsal time, these kinds of decisions needed to be made, or if not made, then you have a plan that's pretty much set in place and subject to testing, but much more on your own, because there really isn't a whole lot of time to be working with the dancers on it. So and you, I think, instinctively felt very good about it right away. So in subsequent videocasts, we will be hearing about the way in which Jon chooses to approach the development of this work moving forward, given whatever variables arise, and experience tells us there will probably be many. We will continue to keep you informed about how Jon is experiencing this hiatus. If there's any extra updates about ABB and Purchase, we will keep you informed about that. And of course, we will delve a little bit deeper into Jon's writing and musical composition forays, and continue to try and draw the parallels between all of the different mediums. And well, I'm exhausted just thinking about all of that work. I don't know about you, Jon, but it's also very exciting.
I live it, yes. I'm exhausted.
It is, but it's, you know, to me, you are brimming with creativity, and fortunately have both the talent and the outlets to channel it into. And on behalf of our audience, we all look forward to seeing how this plays out. Perhaps no one more than Jon. So thank you so very much for being with us today, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.